The stagecoach wheels groaned against the dry earth as it rolled to a halt, and the dust clung to Eleanor Whitmore's skirts like it had something to prove. She stepped down slowly, one gloved hand gripping the metal rail, the other cradling a worn satchel. Her boots hit the ground with a soft thud. No one stepped forward. A dozen faces watched from under the shade of the general store's awning, curious, cautious. A woman in a blue bonnet whispered to her husband. A boy pointed, only to have his hand slapped down. Eleanor didn't meet their eyes. She kept her chin high, her mouth composed into the ghost of a smile. She had pressed her dress herself that morning, careful with the iron she'd borrowed in Omaha. White with lavender stitching. Not new, but clean. She had picked it from her mother's trunk, a wedding dress meant for a day that never came. She scanned the small crowd and saw him. Tall, straight-backed, boots polished like he was waiting for someone important. He had a hawk's stare and the jaw of a man who made decisions without apology. He stepped forward a pace, looked her up and down, and didn't say a word. Eleanor stepped toward him. "Mr. Thomas Rigsby?" she asked, voice steady despite the pressure in her chest. He nodded once. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore. We've been corresponding since January." She smiled faintly, holding out her hand. Thomas glanced at it, then let his eyes roam her face. His expression didn't shift. It hardened. He turned slightly toward the onlookers and said, "I asked for a wife. Not a ghost of one." The words were quiet, but they landed with weight. A chuckle stirred from the edge of the group. A woman gasped. Eleanor's hand slowly fell back to her side. Thomas looked over her shoulder at the coach, then back to her. "I paid for the trip, so you got that much. Don't see any further obligation on my part." Eleanor's voice didn't crack, though it strained. "You spoke of marriage in your letters. You said..." "I said I needed someone to keep a house. I said I wanted a healthy, respectable woman. You sent no photograph." Eleanor swallowed. "You sent none either. I didn't need to. I've got the land, the name, and the money. That's enough for most." She stared at him, searching for the man who had written about early mornings, about building a family, about reading the Bible at supper. But none of that was here. Only a man with a strong jaw, a stiff hat, and nothing behind his eyes. "I won't be made a fool," he muttered, mostly to himself. Eleanor's spine straightened. She turned slightly, her profile toward the others, so they wouldn't see the heat rising in her cheeks. "You needn't worry," she said. "You've done a fine job of that yourself." Thomas stiffened, but she was already walking, gripping her satchel tighter, her boots kicking up dry dust with each determined step. No one called after her. She didn't cry. Not when the sun beat down her neck. Not when a horse snorted nearby. Not even when a little girl's voice floated through the wind, asking, "Mama, is that the ugly lady?" She walked until the town blurred behind her. Until the dirt gave way to the edge of the stables, where the old man was mucking a stall and barely lifted his head when she asked if there was work. "Cleaning," he grunted. "Sleeping quarters ain't much. I won't take up much room," she replied. He pointed to the back. A corner behind a partition of wood boards and a few bales of straw. The smell of horses, sweat, and dust filled the air. She laid her satchel down gently and sat beside it. Still no tears. Just the sound of the wind sneaking through the gaps in the stable walls, and the way her fingers gently smoothed the skirt that had once belonged to Hope. That night she unfolded her hands and opened the only letter she had kept from Thomas. The words now felt like lies printed in careful ink. She folded it again, slowly, then dropped it into the lantern's flame and watched it burn. Her face stayed still, but the corners of her eyes tightened. The following morning, she rose early. Cleaned every stall. Carried water. Swept the front of the livery till it looked better than it had in years. Mr. Kraus watched her from the doorway, chewing a toothpick. "You work quiet," he said. "I've been told." She didn't mention her past. No one asked? She was the woman who came for a man who wouldn't have her. That was enough of a story for most folks. Days passed. She moved like someone who had something to prove, though she never said what. She ate little, slept lightly, and kept her hair pinned tight. Her dress faded more each week, and still she wore it clean. The whispers didn't stop, but they got quieter. Folks always had other things to talk about. She began talking to the horses. They never talked back, but they listened better than people. When she brushed them, she sang low, not words, just melodies remembered from Ohio, from a time when her mother hummed them over boiling beans. Evenings were the hardest. That's when silence had room to grow. When the dust settled and the town went still, Eleanor sat by the lantern and pulled out a small book of poetry, her only indulgence. One night, there was something else. A folded piece of paper, tucked under the window ledge. She stared at it. Picked it up slowly, hands steady but heart suddenly alive in her chest. No name. No greeting. You deserve better than a man who couldn't see past your eyes. She read it again. And again. And something cracked, not sadness, not joy, just surprise. She placed it back on the table. And for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she smiled. Just slightly. But real. She left it where she found it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe someone was playing with her heart again. But the next night, there was another note. And it wasn't a joke. Not this time. The second letter came with a pressed wildflower folded inside. Eleanor turned it over in her hands, careful not to crush the soft blue petals. She didn't smile, not outright, but something flickered across her face, like a match struck in a quiet room. Each evening after her work was done, she began checking the ledge just before sunset. And each evening, something waited there. A note. A verse. A line from a book she'd once mentioned in passing conversation with the stable boy. A detail no one else would have remembered. She started replying. At first, just a single line scribbled on scrap paper, slipped behind a loose floorboard in the back stall. The next morning, that note would be gone. Replaced by another. She never signed her name. Neither did he. You sweep the stables like you're conducting an orchestra. One note read. Even the dust seems to obey you. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she wrote. Someone's got to bring order to all this stubbornness. Then she waited. The next reply. That stubbornness suits you. Makes you look taller somehow. That one made her laugh, just once, short and sharp. Mr. Krause glanced over from his usual post near the door but said nothing. Eleanor didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to, not yet. It wasn't about faces or names. Not anymore. She'd learned how quickly a face could lie. The words, though, these words didn't pretend to be anything they weren't. They didn't flatter. They noticed. I saw you help that old mare give birth. You didn't flinch once. You kept your hand steady even when the others wouldn't touch her. That's the kind of woman who belongs here. Not the kind who runs. She read that note twice. Then folded it into her pocket and kept it there all day. Over time, her posture changed. Not much. Just a little straighter. Her chin didn't dip so quickly when someone passed her in the street. She still walked alone, but she walked like she didn't mind it. Children stopped staring. Some of them started saying hello. One morning, while brushing down the black gelding, Eleanor noticed a pair of boots near the stable door. She looked up. A young woman, Annabel Gentry, the banker's daughter, stood holding a basket of biscuits. They're extra, Annabel said quickly, not meeting her eyes. Mama made too many. Eleanor reached out, took the basket gently. Thank you, she said. Annabel nodded once and turned away, her braids swinging behind her. That night, Eleanor set the basket aside and went straight to the floorboard. Another note. Another line that tugged something behind her ribs. I heard what he said to you that day. I've been trying to unhear it since. She read it slowly. Then again. The paper trembled slightly in her fingers. She wrote back. Words like that dig deep. But they're not planted. They won't grow. And left it, her heart tight in her chest like it was holding its breath. Days passed. More letters. Some short. Some long. One filled with nothing but questions. What makes you laugh? Do you miss trees? Do you believe in God when it rains? She answered every one. He wrote back. I don't remember what your voice sounds like. But I read it anyway. She stared at that one longer than the rest. Then wrote. I don't remember what your face looks like. And I think I prefer it that way. She meant it. The mystery was no longer unsettling. It had become safe. Predictable. A rhythm. Her hands, once cracked and rough, began to soften again from the butter Mrs. Price gave her in exchange for sweeping her front porch. The letters taught her the shape of someone's soul before she ever saw his shoes. It wasn't courtship. It wasn't fantasy. It was steady. He noticed when she fed the dogs in the alley behind the saloon. When she brought spare oats to the preacher's horse. When she helped a new girl from the train carry her bags to the boarding house. No one else noticed those things. Only him. One evening, the letter simply said, I'm ready if you are. She didn't answer right away. That night, she sat on the edge of her bedroll, staring at the bare wood wall. The wind outside rustled the loose boards. The lamp flickered. The stable creaked. She thought of his words. The ones that had caught her just before she sank, over and over again. The ones that saw her, not for what she wasn't, but for everything she had managed to keep alive inside her. She reached for her pencil. If you're serious, meet me behind the stable at dusk on Sunday. I won't ask again. Then she folded the note and slid it into place. The next morning, it was gone. She didn't look for another reply. Didn't need to. All she did was wait. Sunday came quiet. The kind of quiet that made you notice your own breathing. Eleanor sat on the edge of the trough, fingers laced together, thumb worrying a patch of frayed thread on her sleeve. She hadn't worn the lavender-stitched dress, just a plain gray one, clean and mended. No pretense. Not tonight. The sun dipped low behind the stable, spilling gold across the dry grass. Her eyes didn't move from the fence line. Footsteps, slow and uneven. Not hesitant, just deliberate. A limp. She didn't stand. She waited. A man stepped into view. Not young. Weather-worn. One side of his face bore the kind of scar you didn't ask about. His coat was neat but frayed at the cuffs. He held his hat in both hands. You came, she said. He nodded. I'm sorry it took me this long. They didn't shake hands. Didn't touch. Just stood in the slow silence of shared breath. I thought you were someone else, she admitted after a beat. He smiled, small, slanted. I figured. Most folks do. You've been writing me. I have. Why? He looked past her for a second, toward the hills. Because I saw how you stood after he said what he said. I've seen men fall to their knees for less. She didn't flinch at the mention. Just breathed through her nose steady. I'm Caleb, he said. Rigsby. She looked at him then, properly. Same eyes. Same bone structure. But none of Thomas's coldness. I know, she said. I figured it out yesterday. He looked down, like he was expecting her to ask why he'd hidden it. She didn't. You wrote like a man who knew what silence feels like, she said instead. He lifted his gaze to meet hers. I spent enough time in it. They sat together on the trough's edge, not touching, not speaking for a while. The crickets started up somewhere in the weeds. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I didn't think you'd look like this, she replied. Disappointed? She shook her head. No. Just surprised I was right. How so? You don't write like a man who cares about pretty things. Caleb laughed. Just once. Not much use for pretty. Pretty lies. Pretty words. Pretty brothers. Do you hate him? He didn't answer right away. Then, not anymore. Pity's a quieter weight to carry. Eleanor looked down at her hands, then back at him. He didn't just embarrass me. He exposed me. Made me feel like a mule brought to auction. Caleb's jaw tightened. Not anger. Just a deep pull of something older than rage. He didn't see what was standing in front of him. He said. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. I used to teach, he said after a while. Before the fire. Before the war. Before I was a face folks turned away from. What did you teach? History. Letters. Whatever kept the kids quiet. She smiled. That's what gave you away, you know. He turned curious. You referenced Thoreau in one of your letters. I doubt the clerk at the general store reads Walden. Caught me, he murmured. Guess I'm not much of a mystery anymore. No, she said softly. You're something better. He looked over, long and steady. I'm not whole, he said. Not what most women would call presentable. She turned to face him, steady as the morning sun. Do I look like most women? He didn't answer. She leaned forward, just enough for her words to meet the space between them. You're the only man in this town who's looked at me without wincing. I never winced. I know. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at her skirt. A wagon creaked somewhere nearby. Life went on, unaware of the shift happening beside the water trough. Why now? She asked. Why show your face now? I didn't want to ruin the idea of me. You didn't. He looked at her hands. They were callous but soft at the joints. Her nails short, neat. Capable hands. I thought I'd write until you stopped replying, he said. Didn't expect it to last. Neither did I. I was waiting for you to ask to meet. I waited for you to offer. They sat a little closer now. The space between their elbows just enough for breath, not doubt. What happens now? He asked. She shrugged. We talk. We walk. We decide. That simple? That honest? He looked down at his boots, then back to her. You scared? No. Why not? Because you didn't run when I gave you the choice. He gave a slow nod, thoughtful. You hungry? Always. There's a pear tree near my place. They're not ripe, but they're stubborn. Like someone I know. She stood up. Show me. He rose carefully. His limp didn't slow him. He didn't reach for her hand, and she didn't offer it. They didn't need the touch yet. They walked side by side, shadows stretching long behind them. No promises. No performances. Just steps. Just quiet. Just enough. The next morning, Eleanor poured water from the pump with a rhythm, not urgency. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, arms freckled from sun, skin not soft but sure. Caleb was waiting near the stable fence, hands tucked into his coat, eyes tracking the slow movement of her work without interrupting it. When she was done, she walked toward him, not fast, not shy. Just present. You always watch like you're memorizing, she said. Maybe I am. They didn't speak more until they were walking out past the back fields. It had rained overnight. The ground was firm, but the air smelled like turned earth. Caleb carried a sack slung over one shoulder. I brought a hammer, he said. Fence out past Widow Harper's broke last week. Thought we could fix it. Eleanor glanced at him. We? I talk better with my hands busy. She didn't say yes. Just kept walking beside him. The fence was down in 2 places. They didn't plan. They just started. He drove the nails. She held the posts. When he stopped to wipe sweat from his brow, she didn't ask questions. When she handed him a nail, their fingers brushed, and neither of them moved away fast. Used to do this kind of work with my brother, Caleb said, eyes on the rail. She waited. He always swung the hammer like he was proving something. You don't? I'm not proving anything anymore. She nodded. Good. He didn't look at her when he said, I don't want to talk about him. But I don't want to pretend he doesn't exist. That's fair. Caleb leaned on the fence once it was upright, catching his breath. You ever think about going back east? He asked. Eleanor squinted toward the horizon. And do what? Start over. Somewhere no one knows your name. I like it better here. People leave you be. That why you stayed? No, she said. I stayed because I knew if I left, I'd always feel like I ran. I'd rather build than retreat. Caleb looked down at his hands. You ever think about building something with someone? She didn't answer right away. Then, yes. Once. And now? She turned to face him fully. You asking? I might be. Then ask? He held her gaze for a moment, then let out a breath, slow and deliberate. I want to walk beside someone who knows how to stand on their own. I want someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong and look at me when I'm not easy to look at. I want you. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. That's not a question. He smirked. Would you consider sharing the rest of your days with a man who ain't got much but land, scars, and some honest intentions? Depends. On what? On whether the land comes with shade and the scars come with stories. They do. She stepped closer. Then yes. They didn't embrace. They didn't kiss. But something passed between them, solid and unseen. On the walk back, he reached out. She let his fingers brush hers. Not a full grip. Just enough to say, I'm here. Later that week, he came to the stable with a small package wrapped in cloth. Inside, a tin cup, a carving knife, and a folded page. A start, he said. She traced the rim of the cup. You giving me your second best possessions? No. Just the ones I want you to have. They sat near the stalls, sharing a biscuit, silent between bites. Caleb watched her feed the old mule in the last stall. She didn't rush it. She scratched behind its ears, murmured something too soft to hear. You speak kindly to everything, he said. It's easier than not. He leaned forward slightly. What's the hardest thing you've ever forgiven? Myself, she said without pause. He nodded. That's the hardest for me too. She didn't say anything. Just looked at him, the way someone might look at a place that feels like home before they've called it that. That night, he didn't leave a letter. He brought her supper instead. Salt pork and beans. She ate quietly while he patched a broken latch on the stable door. When she finished, she said, You're better than your brother. He didn't answer. She added, Not just nicer. Better. He gave her a look then, unsure if he believed it. I wouldn't say that unless I meant it, she said. He picked up his hat, dusted it off. Don't need to keep comparing me to him. I'm not, she said. I'm comparing him to you. That stopped him. Big difference, she added. He chuckled soft. You're sure of yourself. Only lately. Because of me? Because of who I am around you. That quiet hung between them. Not heavy. Just true. He tipped his hat before leaving. Good night, Eleanor. She waited until he was past the fence line before replying. Good night, Caleb. Eleanor brushed flour from her hands as she watched the kettle hiss on the stove. It wasn't her stove. It was Mr. Krause's, and he didn't like folks using it, but he'd grunted and waved her on when she offered him a plate of bread that morning without asking. Now she used it most evenings. Caleb knocked once, light against the frame, then stepped inside with his usual care, hat held respectfully, shoulders dusted in the last of the day's work. I brought you something, he said. She looked down at his hands. A folded bit of cloth, tied with twine. She undid the knots slowly and found a bar of soap, hand-carved and wrapped in brown paper. It smells like pine, she said, almost smiling. It's not store-bought. Made it from old tallow. Been sitting on my shelf for months, waiting for someone better suited to it. She nodded and placed it beside the basin. Thank you. They sat near the door on two old crates. The light outside thinned slowly, stretching the shadows long. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket but didn't open it. You still writing? She asked. Mostly out of habit. Seems odd not to. Let me hear one. He hesitated, then passed it over. She unfolded it carefully. The ink was dark and pressed deeper on some words than others, like he'd paused and come back to them. She read in silence. It wasn't poetry, not quite. Just plain thoughts, shaped gently. When she finished, she held the page in both hands. You still don't sign them. You know who they're from. She folded the paper again and handed it back. I like hearing your voice more. He smiled at that. Just faintly. I had a dream last night, she said. About a house. Nothing grand. Just a room with a stove that worked without protest and a shelf where we kept 3 books. 3? 1 for stories. 1 for recipes. 1 for letters we didn't send. He was quiet a moment. I could build that. The shelf, at least. You'd have to let me cook. I'd let you do more than that. She turned her head. Say it plain. I want to marry you. She didn't blink. Say it plainer. I want you in my house. I want to share the work and the quiet. I want to be the one who sees you every morning and still thinks he's lucky. She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. Then she stood and walked to the window. Her fingers traced the old glass. I used to want lace curtains. Then I wanted a lock on the inside. What do you want now? A man who waits until I speak before filling the room. He didn't move. She turned back. You might be him. He stood then, not fast. I'll wait for your answer, Eleanor. No pressure. No hurry. You already have, she said. And I already know. That evening, they walked to the edge of the pasture. He pointed out the stars, naming a few badly. She corrected him, but gently. You're not half as smart as your letters, she teased. Good thing you didn't marry my handwriting. She looked over. I almost did. He reached for her hand. This time, she took it fully. It's not going to be easy, he said. I've never expected it to be. You sure you want the name? I'm sure I want the man. He didn't speak again that night, just walked beside her, their steps in rhythm without needing to be. The next morning, she wore her lavender-stitched dress again. She mended the hem the night before, her stitches careful, not perfect. She wore it like it belonged to her present, not her past. At the general store, Mrs. Price leaned in close, whispering, You look different. Eleanor didn't explain. She didn't need to. That afternoon, they worked together in the yard behind Caleb's cabin. She pulled weeds while he repaired the bench that would become their porch seat. They didn't say much. When she stood to wipe her brow, he handed her a cloth without being asked. Never thought I'd have this again, he said. What's that? Company. Real company. Not someone passing through. I'm not passing. I know. They stood a moment in the quiet. You nervous? He asked. No. Why not? I've lived through worse than love. That stopped him, just for a second. Then he nodded. I'll carve our initials in the bench, he said. Do it tomorrow, she replied. Let's see if we earn it. That night, they sat on the unfinished porch, watching the sun dip low over Dry Creek. Her head rested near his shoulder, not quite touching. He looked out over the horizon. This place has never looked so soft. It hasn't changed, she said. Maybe I have. Maybe we both did. He turned his head slightly. I don't know if I deserve this. You don't have to, she said. Just don't waste it. The chapel smelled of old wood and faint lilac. Eleanor stood at the back, hands clasped lightly in front of her. She wasn't wearing lace. No veil. Just her lavender dress again, the one stitched years ago, worn with the kind of confidence that didn't ask for permission anymore. Whispers carried along the rows of benches. Most folks hadn't expected the ceremony to happen. A few hadn't expected to attend, but curiosity has a pull stronger than pride. They sat anyway, postmaster, butcher, Mrs. Price, even old Mr. Krause, cleaned up and chewing slower than usual. Thomas Rigsby stood near the door in a clean coat, arms crossed, mouth tight. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the floor. Alone. Caleb stood at the front with his hat held against his chest. His coat was pressed, boots clean, hair combed back but still slightly unruly near the scar that crossed his temple. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift. He just waited, calm and steady like always. The preacher began to speak, but Eleanor didn't hear the words at first. She was looking at Caleb, watching the way his eyes softened the moment hers met them. That was the real ceremony. The words were just to keep everyone else still. You come here not as strangers, the preacher was saying, but as two who've walked through fire before finding the quiet. A nod from Caleb, almost imperceptible. You come not to possess one another, but to witness one another fully. Eleanor's breath moved slower now. Not nervous, just full. And in doing so, to love not for what was lost, but for what remains. They didn't read vows. That was Eleanor's idea. She said words were what brought them together, but now was the time for living, not reciting. The preacher asked if she took him. She didn't answer with words. She reached out and took Caleb's hand, fingers weaving into his like they'd been doing it for years. The preacher smiled. Turned to Caleb. Do you? Yes, Caleb said. No hesitation. There was a pause. A laugh, light and brief, from someone near the back. Then stillness again. A nod from the preacher. A quiet amen. There was no kiss. They stood side by side, hands joined, and turned to face the room. No one clapped. No one needed to. As they walked down the aisle, Caleb's limp slowed their steps, but Eleanor matched his pace easily, like she'd always walked that way. Outside, the air had shifted. The wind was gentler, sun low but not yet setting. Thomas was still there, leaning against the railing. Caleb met his eye briefly. Nothing passed between them, no words, no gestures. But Thomas straightened, gave a small nod, and turned to walk away. That was enough. They didn't throw rice. There was no cake. Just people standing outside in their Sunday clothes, hats in hand, watching the pair walk down the dirt road that led back toward the edge of town. Mrs. Price stepped forward and handed Eleanor a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Bread starter, she said. The good kind? Eleanor took it with both hands. Thank you. You earned it. They walked past the livery, where the stable boy had tied a sprig of rosemary to the gate. A quiet gesture. She smiled at him. He looked away, shy, proud. Caleb didn't speak until they reached the first fence. You all right? He asked. I was all right before, she said. Now I'm better. You don't regret it? I regret not letting you speak sooner. He smiled. I wasn't ready. You were always ready. You just didn't know it. They passed the old tree where he'd first read her one of his letters aloud. The bark had grown over the scar he'd carved, just a small notch now, smooth and shallow. Still want to build that bench? She asked. Already cut the wood. I'll paint it. You paint? No, she said. But I'll try. He laughed, full this time. She liked that sound. It made the fields feel warmer. That night they sat on the cabin porch, her head resting near his shoulder, eyes on the horizon. No fire, just the last of the sun. Do you remember the first thing you ever wrote me? She asked. No. You said I walked like someone who wasn't afraid of silence. He nodded. Still true. I was afraid, she said. Then. And now? Now I know it's just another place to stand. Caleb turned to her, eyes reflecting something unspoken. He didn't say he loved her. That would come later, in ways that mattered, when he brought in water before she asked, when he stayed up with her through the night without needing to talk, when he remembered the page in the book where she stopped reading. Love, for them, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. They stayed on the porch long after the sun dipped down, watching the town go still. And not once did either of them look away.